Hey everybody, we're going to take this moment to sort of layer on some concepts that we've already discussed in the course, but they keep coming back again and again in different forms. So we're going to talk for a moment about elasticity and inelasticity and how they interact with monopolies. So if you see here, you see what looks like a monopoly graph on the upper graph with a downward sloping demand curve and the marginal revenue underneath the demand curve. And so if you remember back from an earlier module, when you're trying to figure out elasticities, you have something called the total revenue test, which is if price is falling and total revenue is increasing, then you know that the demand is elastic. And if price is falling and total revenue is falling, then you know that the demand is inelastic. And so basically, if price and revenue are going in the same direction, you know that it's inelastic, up or down. And if price and total revenue are going in opposite directions, you know that it is elastic. So one way that you could envision a monopoly graph is that simultaneously there's a total revenue curve always underneath it, lined up directly. And you can see that as the monopolist is lowering their price, total revenue is increasing. And that means that this is the elastic range of the demand curve. If you remember from an earlier module, every single demand curve has an elastic range and an inelastic range. And so what this is basically showing you is that when marginal revenue hits 0 on the graph, right here, you can see that total revenue is maximized. So if you're a monopolist, why would you ever lower your price into your inelastic range? You wouldn't, because at that point your total revenue is simply decreasing. So monopolists are going to solely produce in their elastic range. There's the inelastic range, and there's total revenue decreasing. So, to go a little bit further, are monopolies efficient? We're going to bring back the fundamental ideas of allocative efficiency and productive efficiency that we learned in earlier modules. So monopolies are inefficient, as you've seen in various videos, because they charge a higher price, right? Their price is higher than marginal cost, and they don't produce enough. So they produce less quantity and charge a higher price. So they are not allocatively efficient, because allocative efficiency is where supply meets demand. And you've seen in these videos that they do not produce where supply meets demand. But they are also not productively efficient, because they produce at higher costs. They do not produce at the bottom of their average total cost curve. You've seen this in a number of ways. First of all, some natural monopolies have incredibly high fixed costs, and they will continue to produce because they're trying to get their cost curve lower. But at the same time, because they produce higher than marginal cost, they don't necessarily have to worry about being at the bottom of their average total cost curve. And because there's no competition, they have little incentive to innovate. Why is this? There's very little external pressure, and we call those barriers to entry, which you've heard before. So let's layer on another concept and talk about consumer surplus, producer surplus, and deadweight loss. So again, these are concepts from an earlier module, but it's really important that you keep bringing them back again and again, because that's how you sort of develop a deeper understanding of those concepts. So what we have here in front of us is a very standard monopoly with a downward sloping demand curve. And if you notice, the marginal cost curve right here, I mean, normally we would put a sort of a Nike swoosh or a check mark, but it's just showing the upper portion of the marginal cost curve. And it is labeled as supply. Now, why is that? That's because The marginal cost curve for a monopoly is the supply curve for the industry and the monopoly itself. Remember, this is the marginal cost curve above average variable cost, because if it was below that, it would have to shut down. So that's the supply curve. And so the question on the slide is, where is consumer surplus and producer surplus for a monopoly? Well, you can probably take a guess, but if all monopolies produce where MR equals MC at this point right here, and they charge here, then we should be able to figure out consumer surplus. So remember the definition for consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is anytime you get more value than you actually had to pay. So the difference between what you would have paid and what you had to pay. So all of these people on the demand curve were willing to pay more, but they only had to pay this price right there. So that triangle there is consumer surplus. What about producer surplus? Well, producer surplus is anything where the supplier was willing to supply it for less but got to charge more. So what does that look like? Well, in this particular case, it looks like this box right here, producer surplus. Why is this missing? If you remember from our taxes lecture and our price floors and price ceilings, when a firm is not operating where supply meets demand, there's going to be some type of inefficiency. And we already said that the inefficiency in monopolies is that they produce less and charge more. So we know there's going to be something called deadweight loss in a monopoly. And in this case, it is this area right here. And so let's examine why that is. This is the point where supply meets demand. This is where the market would be allocatively efficient. They would be producing more quantity, and they would be charging a lower price. But because the monopoly has market power, it produces less and charges more. And what that does is it removes some consumers from the market. What you should also notice is that the producer surplus is quite larger than the consumer surplus. And you can do a quick little logic check. Does that make sense? Yes, it's a monopoly. The producer surplus is going to be significantly higher because they're charging above marginal cost. They're making more profit, and it's a continual profit that doesn't get taken away. So let's stop right there, and we'll do another video on regulating monopolies.